Good morning. We are all in a test, aren't we? As a country, as a world, as individuals, as families, we are all in a test right now, and it's testing our resolve as a people. It's testing our health professionals. It's testing our trust in God. And the question is, are we passing the test? This is a really unusual time in our country, unprecedented for those of us who are living in these days. We've never seen anything like this. And the world has, in past days, but those of us who are alive these days, we've never seen anything like this. And it's sometimes people wonder, how long is this going to last? Are we going to make it through? And I want to remind us that this will pass. This is a test that we will get through. Even though all these things around us are new. I mean, living together at home with just our family and only going out once in a while. It's new for so many people, not having the connections. I've been talking to some people this week, and I'm finding out that most of the people who are introverts are like, this is okay, I can deal with this. Well, I had one guy say to me, hey, I was made for social distancing. But the extroverts are dying. They're like, I got to see people. I got to be with people. This is a new reality that I'm not sure I can handle. And God's going to get us through this. Well, you'll see. He's going to get us through this. Even today, this internet campus kind of thing, this getting online might be new for some of you. So I'm glad you're here. Welcome, worshiping with us. I'm so glad that God led us last year to start an online campus, and we're able to come and have a worship service together and minister to you. And if this is new and weird for you, just hang in there. It's going to be all right. Even if watching this whole thing happening on the internet is kind of strange for you, some of you have made comments about the chats going up and down, right to my left, to your right. Just click on notes if that's bothering you, or click on Bible down there in the corner, and it'll get rid of all that chatter so you can focus in on what God is saying. But all these new things that are happening these days, to kind of dial in to see what God has to say. Pastor John was so right to say, what is Jesus doing? Are we going to listen to him? Are we going to pay attention to him? And I pray that you will pass the test. And all these new things that are happening won't freak you out, but it'll draw you in. I mean, just think about some of the new words that we've heard, new phrases. The word coronavirus existed years and years ago, 5, 10, maybe 10 years ago, but I never heard it. How about social distancing? Did anybody use that phrase in 2019? I didn't know it existed. I knew what pandemic and quarantine were, but I wasn't using that language. National emergency, COVID-19, what is that? And shelter in place, I'd never heard of that phrase. These are all new words, new realities for us, that things we've never experienced before. But I want to challenge you that even though all these are new to us, they're not new to God. People are freaking out with this new language, these new realities, these new circumstances that we're in, but it's not new to God. He's going to lead us through it. And the panic, even some of these words actually create fear for some people. And so this is what happens to the grocery stores. The shelves just empty. I mean, people buying toilet paper by the hundreds. What do you need 100 rolls of toilet paper for? This is like the national symbol for panic buying. This is like the national symbol for fear in our country, that people have got hundreds and hundreds of rolls of toilet paper. So anybody need some toilet paper? I got some for you today. We don't need to fear. We don't need to fear. God's got this. And so here's a question I have for you. What do you do when everybody else around you is feeling fear and you're feeling fear? That's actually the name of the sermon today. What do you do when you feel fear? And I believe that God wants to do something in us. He wants to minister to us in the midst of this kind of fear, and that we don't have to give in to that fear. Every crisis that we're in is a test. And boy, are we in a test today. Every crisis we're in is a test to see how will we respond in the midst of this test. And of course, crises, fear, circumstances that freak us out, that's not new. It's not a modern thing. It's something that's happened since the beginning of time, it seems. And when Jesus was training his disciples, like he's training us, he used in those days the circumstances of life. He used the situations that he found himself in with the disciples and used them as training, as tests to see how we would respond. And I thought of all these different places in the Gospels where Jesus was training his disciples, and I believe he's training us. And so I thought, Lord, what's a good training exercise? What's a time where the disciples were freaking out because of the circumstances around them? And I don't know if they were buying extra toilet paper, but they were flipping out about what was going on. And what did you do in their lives? And I was drawn to Matthew chapter 14. So I invite you to turn with me to the Gospel of Matthew and recognize that Jesus is in the midst of training his disciples. And I want us to be attentive today is how is God training us in the midst of this? As we sit at the feet of Jesus, how is he training us? What is he teaching us? How are we going to pass the test? And even though we're all sitting in our homes or watching on our phones, here at Open Door, whenever we read the Word of God for the beginning of a sermon, we always stand to our feet to honor God's Word. So I invite you to do that with me. Matthew chapter 14, and we'll start at verse 22. And I'm reading out a New International Version, and just kind of enter into this story with me. Jesus has just he's just fed about 5,000 people, and people are wanting to make him king, and they're all excited because they're all full and blown away. And it says immediately, that's what's happening here. Immediately, verse 22, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. So the crowd is clamoring. They're excited about who Jesus is, maybe even trying to make him a king. Jesus is like, not yet, not yet. I got something I want to teach my disciples. So he made them, it's interesting, made them get into the boat, go to the other side. So now verse 23, after he had dismissed the crowd, Jesus went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. And later that night, so he's been praying all afternoon, all evening, sometime in the middle of the night. Later that night, he was there alone up on this hillside, this mountainside. And the boat that the disciples were in was already a considerable distance from the land. Mark tells the exact same story, and he says that the boat was in the middle of the lake. It's being buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. And shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. This is so crazy. Walking on the lake. And when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid. And Peter then says, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus reached out to his hand and caught him, and I believe smiled and said to him, you a little faith, kind of a little chuckle, you a little faith, not making fun of Peter, but just kind of, I love you, Peter. You a little faith, why did you doubt? And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Mark says it died down immediately. Then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. And then verse 34, when they had crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret. That's where I want to stop right there. So you can be seated. When they crossed over. I like that verse, that last verse, when they crossed over, because this verse reminds me of what I believe that God is saying to us today. You're going to get through this storm. It's just a simple verse. But when the disciples were in the boat, when it's dark, when the storm is raging, they're thinking, we're going to die out here. We're going to die out here. We're not going to make it across. And sometimes in crisis like we're in these days, people feel like, is this the new normal? Is this what it's going to be like from now on? Will we ever get through this? Just remember Matthew chapter 14, verse 34. They crossed over. We're going to get through this, guys. We're going to get to the other side. This is not the new normal. It's going to pass. And I want you to know, as your pastor, I want you to know, we're going to take care of you. We're going to help you through this crisis. I know some of you are so afraid, and fear rises up, and it just begins to cloud our mind, and we think, I'm not going to make it. I'm all by myself. Who's going to take care of me? This is what the church is here for. Seriously, we're going to take care of you. This is why we're asking you to contact us. Give us your contact information. Let us know your phone number. Let us know your email. We want to be in contact with you because we want to be here to minister to you. This church has an amazing staff, and they're helping raise up some amazing volunteers. And what we're doing is we're trying to call every person in our church, contact every person in our church, so nobody has to go through this storm alone. Nobody has to go through this crisis alone, so that together we're going to make it through to the other side, and we're going to land at our own Gennesaret. We're going to land at a place on the other side of the lake, on the other side of this crisis. And so we're calling you. We're asking you, how can we pray for you? How can we minister to you? How are you doing? And some of you responded to my email last week and said, hey, I want to be a person who calls. I want to be a person who delivers food. I want to be there helping. And so you're involved. And this is the church, man. Things are happening here in some ways that maybe we didn't, are unprecedented for us. I was talking to a guy yesterday. I called the guy to say, hey, how are you doing? And he said to me, I'm doing great. And he began to tell me some of the things he had done this past week, including somebody had clicked on that URL on the email I sent last week, and give us your email address so we can mail you these things, that I need help. And so this guy called and said, how can we help you? He goes, well, I'm in my house by myself. I can't get groceries, and I've got 6 bags of laundry to do. And so this guy in our church called up another couple in our church, and together these two couples did this guy's 6 loads of laundry. I don't know if I'd be comfortable with you doing 6 loads of my laundry, but 6 loads of laundry. Went out to the grocery store and bought all his stuff for him, brought it and delivered. And he's like, we had a blast. We prayed with the guy. And he's like, I would never have done that. I wouldn't have even known about this if it wouldn't been for these circumstances. See, God's doing some things. He's actually, I think, bringing, my wife uses the language, he's weaving our church together during this crisis. Anybody else sees that, sense that? That he's bringing us together. We're contacting each other more. We're talking to each other more. We're practicing social distancing, but the phones, the emails, the texts, there's the Zoom, connecting each other through some of the technology that's available. There's things that are happening in our church that weren't happening 3 weeks ago, a month ago, a year ago. God's working in the midst of this, and while it is a storm, he's bringing us together in this storm, and we're going to make it through on the other side. We're going to get through this storm. This isn't the only story that the disciples are afraid. This isn't the only time they've been on a lake in the middle of a storm. But whenever you find the disciples in these kind of circumstances, it's always racked with fear. There's fear that rises up in them, even though they've seen Jesus, the miracle worker, the way maker. They've seen him do things. They still flip out when circumstances get bad, and so do we. I mean, those of you who are followers of Jesus, how many times has God met you in the crisis? How many times has he rescued you when things were difficult? And yet, sometimes fear rises, even though in our minds we know I shouldn't be afraid. Fear grabs us, it seizes us, and this word for afraid here, it shows up 4 times in our text because the disciples are freaked out and they are afraid. And God meets us in our fear, as we're going to see in this story. And this word fear is a word you know, phobia. In the Greek, it's phobeo. It's a word that all of us are familiar with because there's all these different kinds of fears. And this one here in 4 times in this passage, it shows up, actually, the word phobeo is 3 times, but it's the 4th word is a different word altogether. But it means to be struck, to be seized with fear. And I love this word. Not that I like the idea, but it's so descriptive. We feel overwhelmed by the fear that we are in. Ever been there? Ever feel like the fear that is surrounding you is just enveloping you? This passage has got some fascinating things. In verse 23, it describes this occurrence happening at nighttime. I think that's really insightful and interesting that this happens in the middle of the night. They're in the middle of a lake. They're in the middle of the night. They're in the middle of a storm. And nighttime is a time that is typically time of fear for some people. In the Bible, this word night, both these times, actually is a time where the prince of darkness works. It's the time where it seems that Satan is at work in deep ways, and people were afraid of the dark. In the NIV, verse 25 says, shortly before dawn, but I gave you the Greek so you could see. It's actually, again, the word night, and I wish they wouldn't have translated that way, because the literal is fourth watch of the night. It's in the deep part of the night. The word dawn actually kind of speaks of hope, but at this point, the disciples are not feeling hope. I want you to enter into where they are. They're not feeling it's almost dawn. They're feeling it's dark. They're feeling fear is surrounding me, and this fear that is so prevalent in the darkness is the fear that has grabbed these disciples. And the darkness of fear, it's such an interesting phrase. The darkness of fear is a way that describes what's happening in our soul. Think about this. The fear is around us, the circumstances are around us, but then it seems as though it kind of gets into us, blinds us. There's a darkness about the power of fear that is destructive, that blinds us, that controls us. And when I look at this passage and I see all these things happening in the middle of the night, I'm like, that's the way fear works. It's like a darkness that surrounds us, and this surrounded makes you feel like you're trapped. Think about the last time you felt fear just kind of rising up. Maybe it was this week. Maybe it was just a couple of days ago. Maybe it was yesterday. And the fear rises in your heart, then it just kind of expands, and it begins to surround you. This is how the disciples are feeling. They're in the middle of the lake. They can't just get out of the boat. They can't just, turn on the light. It's the middle of the dark, middle of the night, middle of the storm, middle of the lake. This is how fear treats us. It surrounds us, and it makes us feel like I'm trapped. And that's why fear actually creates physical problems in people, because they feel like I'm suffocating. I can't get out of this darkness. It's got its teeth in me. It's closing in on me. And all this language that describes the physical situation that these disciples are in is so poetic that describes also the circumstances that many of us feel when fear rises and begins to surround us. And I love Mark's version of this because he helps us. Well, and before we go to Mark, there's one more thing I want you to point out. Notice how it says they were being buffeted. What verse is that? That's verse 24. And the boat was already a considerable distance from land, again, in the middle of the lake. It was being buffeted by the waves. Mark says it was being battered by the waves. The NASB says it was being crashing. The waves were crashing and battering and bashing. And I'm thinking to myself, that's just the way fear is. It buffets us. It bangs us around. It hurts us. But I started looking at this word buffeted, and at the very core of the word is the idea, strangely, of being tormented. It's when the waves are buffeting the boat, when they're crashing into the boat, it's creating a torment inside of the people who are in the boat. And I thought, wow, that's exactly how fear is like, is this buffeting of the boat, this tormenting of the boat is the feeling of being tormented by anxiety. Again, our staff is making a bunch of calls this week, and I called a guy and was talking to him. Actually, this was actually a Zoom conversation we were having, and he was talking about the fear that was attacking him, the fear that he thought he had dealt with, and it just kept coming back. And he didn't use the word torment, but that he was absolutely describing this kind of situation where I deal with the fear and then it comes back up. I deal with the fear and then it's like tormenting. It won't let me go. And this is the way fear often works, is that it just torments us. And the anxiety addresses and surrounds us and just speaks to us these words of fear, and we can't seem to get ourselves out of the fear. And so I said I wanted you to go to Mark. When Mark describes this in Mark chapter 6, he uses language that's about being in the middle of the lake, and this language of kind of almost enveloping them where they're stuck. They're pushing against the wind. They're not making any progress. They're surrounded by darkness. They're tormented by anxiety, and a dread just kind of falls on them. And this surrounding, this tormenting, this outside, this inside all works together to just kind of suffocate them. And how, again, descriptive is that of people who are going through this kind of crisis? They feel that they're being tormented. Is this you? Do you feel like you're being suffocated? Like I can't breathe. It's very sadly ironic to the way the coronavirus actually works. It tells us that it works in our lungs, and it restricts our ability to breathe and destroys some things in there, so we can't breathe, and we're actually being suffocated. What a picture of what fear does to us. It's not a thing that God traffics in. Fear is something that the devil is trying to use in our lives to suffocate us, to destroy us, to break us down. And that's why it says over and over in the Bible, don't fear. It's the most common command. So let's turn to verse 25 and see now what's happening next. Verse 25, it says that shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them. He sees them. He goes out to them walking on the lake. And when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost. There's that word terrified, fear again. It's a ghost, they said, and they cried out in fear. And then it says that Jesus says to them, take courage. Such beautiful words. Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. And this is the command of Jesus we're looking at today. The command of don't be afraid. I know you're feeling that fear. And so if you're taking notes, right above me, there's a place for you to click that, as we heard earlier. If you're taking notes, point one is when you feel the fear rise up, when you feel that fear, don't be afraid. So kind of write that down, and let's talk about this command that Jesus gave us. It could sound like, what do you mean don't be afraid? There's a storm. There's wind. We're going to drown. We're not going to make it. But Jesus says, don't be afraid because I'm here. And they don't recognize Jesus. It's real clear. They think he's a ghost. They're terrified at what they see. Even though they know Jesus, even though they've walked with him, literally they've been living with him for maybe a year and a half, 2 years. They know Jesus, but they don't recognize him. Why is that? Because fear distorts. It distorts our vision. It distorts our ability to sense what's going on around us. There's things that happen even chemically in our brains that where fear rises and it begins to cloud our vision, and we're not able to see clearly. We're not able to hear what people are saying. We actually can misinterpret what someone is saying because fear arises in our hearts, and it distorts, again, here our vision, and distorts the things that we hear. And fear deceives us. They're looking at Jesus, but they think it's a ghost. Again, this is their friend. But this is the way fear works. Think about the last time you felt surrounded by fear, where fear was engulfing you, where it was suffocating you. Your vision, your sense of things, how you recognize things, it gets distorted, and the Satan actually works in the fear. That's why the Bible calls him the prince of darkness. He works in the fear to distort the truth. Think about the relationships we're in. I heard one psychologist, actually, I went to counseling one time. I heard a counselor say to me, Jim, every time you say something that's defensive or say something that's unhealthy or say something that's actually mean, you're operating out of a fear. Every time you're in a conflict with your wife or with your children or with a friend, every conflict that you have, you're coming out of a place of fear. And I was like, wow. He said, everybody's this way. Everybody responds when they're responding in unhealthy ways within their marriage, in unhealthy ways in their relationships, in unhealthy ways with God, that they're coming out of a place of fear, and fear distorts and deceives the truth, and it deceives us, and we literally hear things differently than what they're said. We see things differently than what they are. That's the power of fear. I know you've all seen this acronym, that fear is false evidence appearing real. You know, we kind of make it up. It's not really true. It's fake news out there that we hear it, and it looks real, it sounds real, and it begins to affect us, and it's distorting our thinking. It's deceiving us, and it begins to dominate our thinking so much so we're trapped in this fear. This is what's happening with these disciples. Fear is dominating them. They can't get beyond it. Now look at these. I could have used a lot more D words. Fear divides us. It separates us. It isolates us. There's all these words that start with D that are so destructive, and that's the last word I want you to write down. Fear destroys. It destroys our judgment. It destroys our relationships. Because see, healthy relationships must operate on trust. But when I'm afraid that you're not going to take care of me, that you're not going to listen to me, that you're not going to respond to me, that you're not going to hear where I'm coming from, that you're not going to understand me, when I'm afraid, and when the distortion begins to happen, I lose trust, and it begins to affect, but more than affect, it begins to destroy our relationships. So this pandemic of fear that's happening in our society these days, it's not just about toilet paper. It's not just about, am I going to have something to eat? It's not just about, am I going to get the coronavirus? It's actually a picture of what happens in our relationships. So this crisis in our lives and this crisis here in Matthew 14 can teach us something about the power of fear. Why Jesus commands us, do not be afraid. Why that command is mentioned more places than any place else in the Bible, and it's repeated more than any other command in the Bible. Don't be afraid. Do not fear. It's destroying the very fabric of your life, because the very fabric of your life is relationships. You lose trust. You lose hope. Your thinking is, again, distorted. Fear dominates. And you know, those of you who are disciples of Jesus, you want to be people who are using what God's given you to bless other people. We talk about how discipleship is stewardship. And stewardship is destroyed in a context of fear. People, instead of giving to their neighbor, they hoard. Instead of being open-handed and saying, how can I help you? How can I bless you? Fear causes me to say, well, I got to take care of myself. And we forget that God's given us everything we have so that we can bless others. And we take that and we just say, I got to keep it to myself. I got to keep the toilet paper. I got to keep my money. I got to keep my food. I'm not here to share because it's every man for himself. Really? Why would someone say that? Because fear divides. Fear destroys our relationships, and fear destroys our desire to be good stewards of all that we have. And so in this time where fear rises, I want to challenge you, those of you who are giving your tithes to this church, those of you who are practicing good stewardship in this church, don't stop. Don't let fear keep you from giving. And those of you you've got neighbors that you've been building a relationship with, don't stop being good stewards to them. Don't stop giving to them. Don't turn off the stewardship of trusting God with your resources and giving to your neighbors. Be a good steward in the midst of the storm. Continue to trust God. Continue to give. Continue to ask God, how can I be a vessel that you can give to? How can I help other people in the midst of this crisis? How can I be a good steward? I can imagine one person saying, well, Jim, the reason why we're not giving is because you closed down the church. I mean, how are we supposed to give if there's no church? Well, that's what we were talking about earlier with the online giving. I actually have a confession to make. Last week, I came with my tithe check in my envelope ready to give. And I even though I knew we weren't going to have an offering, I just was kind of in the mode. That's what I do. I give every week, and I bring my tithe check. It's an act of worship, and I put it in the offering plate. And when the time for offering came, I was like, well, that's right, we're not having an offering today. So here's a confession. Your lead pastor did not give last week. Maybe that's one of the reasons why we were a third of what we normally give. I was just like you. I didn't give, so I got on this week and signed on for online giving and gave double to catch up from last week. And I encourage you to do the same thing. You don't always follow me, but this is a good time to follow me. Get online. It's real simple. Don't do it right now, but after the service, get online and figure out how to do online giving and continue to be a good steward of what God's giving you. As a church, we're trying to feed people. We're trying to bless people. We're trying to be good stewards of what God's given us. So help us in this to be good stewards. Don't let fear destroy your relationships. Don't let fear destroy your stewardship. Do not be afraid. Okay, so we can write this down. When you feel the darkness, do not be afraid. Okay, so then what should I do? If I'm not going to be giving into fear, and I'm not, what do I focus on? Because this is what fear does. It gets us to focus in on the circumstances, to focus in on the fear. So I've got to change my focus. So you look at this verse 26, we see the disciples, at the very end of the verse, they're crying out in fear. That's the last word of verse 26. Even though they know they're not supposed to be afraid, they're hanging out with Jesus all these times, but now they're alone, they're not with Jesus, and so the fear, end of verse 26, has arisen and it's suffocating them and it's just taking over their life. But look at verse 27. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I. It's almost as if when Jesus uses this language, it's me, it is I. He's saying to them, focus on me. Change your focus to not focus on the fear, but focus on me. Here, look at me. It's almost kind of the way Jesus is saying, take courage. Here, look at me. Don't look at the fear. Don't look at the wind. Don't look at the waves. Focus in on me. I'm here. It is I. And that's why you can take courage. And that's why you don't need to be afraid, because I'm here. So I want to just pause and give you a Greek grammar lesson. Notice how I put the ... here in yellow. They cried out in fear, and that ... this is going to be the greatest Greek grammar lesson you've ever heard, by the way. This ... helps us see that they're living in fear. They're continuing in fear. And this phrase that starts with the word but, in Greek, we call this but a logical contrastive. Now, this is why this is important. Because logically, the ... continues. Logically, if I'm in fear, surrounded by fear, dominated by fear, I'm going to continue in that unless something interrupts, something contrasts that. So when we say logical contrastive, it breaks the logic, it breaks the flow, it actually is interrupting our fear. I love the way this word plays out. Fear just is moving, it's consuming, I'm captured, but Jesus interrupts it. He breaks the logical flow. It's almost kind of like electricity. Electricity will flow until a light switch, until a switch turns it off and interrupts it. And this is the way fear works. It's like electrical current. Just, we're stuck into it. We can't get out of it. And Jesus comes and interrupts the current. He interrupts the fear and speaks into our lives. That's why it's not just but, it's but Jesus. And what? Jesus immediately. I want you to know, friends, that when you are feeling fear, Jesus is there to interrupt that fear, to speak into that fear, and to interrupt it from happening. But you got to have your eyes open. You got to have your ears open, because Jesus is about to interrupt that fear and speak into the captivity, the electrical current that's got us stuck in the fear. But before Jesus says, it is I, before Jesus says, I'm here, before Jesus interrupts the fear, I want you to see one more thing, or actually several more things. In order to do this, you need to go to Mark chapter 6, where Mark tells us almost the story almost the exact same way that Matthew does. But he says in verse 47 and 48, he says, later that night, while the boat was in the middle, remember how I said it's in the middle of the lake, Jesus was all alone. And then verse 48 says, he saw the disciples. Let me highlight that. He saw the disciples. Jesus sees, write this down. Jesus sees you in your crisis. He sees you straining against the oars. It's quite a picture. He's up in these mountains, almost like he's up in heaven. He's removed, and yet he sees. Do you see the picture here? I've actually been on the Sea of Galilee. I've been up on one of these mountainsides and looked down on the lake, and there's miles and miles. They're probably 3-4 miles away from Jesus. He's removed. He's on the mountain. He's on the hillside looking at, but he sees them. And sometimes you feel that God doesn't see you in your fear. Well, I want you to remember this story from Mark chapter 6, that he sees them and then he moves to help them. Both at this point, both Mark in Mark 6 and Matthew in Matthew 17 almost have the exact same words when they say that Jesus then came to them. Again, this is the fourth watch of the night. This is in the middle of the night, probably 3-4 o'clock. Jesus went out to them. So he sees them and then he goes out to them. Write this down. Jesus has come to you. He sees you in your fear, and just like this passage, he doesn't go, oh, well, I hope they figure that out. He sees you, and he has come to you. Friends, this is the story of Christmas. God, who's in heaven, sees us as humans surrounded by darkness, enveloped by fear, and he sends Jesus to come to us. This is the story of Christmas. Jesus comes to humanity. This is not only the story of Christmas, this is the story of our daily life. Jesus sees us and he comes to us. He sees us racked by fear. He sees us surrounded by the darkness, and he comes to you. And I put it this way, that he has come to you because you don't need to wait. These guys needed to. Jesus was in the mountains, they're on the boat. But now that Jesus has died for us, has resurrected and ascended into heaven and sent his Holy Spirit, he has said to us, I will always be with you. I will never leave you. Jesus has come to you. You may feel like you're alone. You may feel like you're abandoned. And you may be waiting, when is he going to come? That's why I want you to see these words. He has come to you. Amen? And he's already seen you, and he's already come to you. And he's waiting for you to recognize him. Why has he come? Because he cares for you. He sees you and his heart is stirred. He sees you in your fear. He sees you captivated, dominated by fear. And his heart stirs, and so he comes to you again and again and again. And he's there because he cares, because he wants to minister to you. He is with you. Why don't you just say out loud where you're sitting, Jesus is with me. Just say that out loud. I know it may feel weird for you. Jesus is with me. Now, if you're watching this in your home with somebody else, and you should be 6 feet away, yell across that 6 feet chasm and say to them, Jesus is with you. Go ahead, do that. Yeah, it feels kind of weird, doesn't it? But it's good for us to hear. Jesus is with you. And this is what Jesus says to the disciples. I'm here. It is I. I'm with you. I'm present. And I love how then Peter says, Lord, if it's you, because he's not sure yet. This is the next verse, 28. If it's you, tell me to come to you on the water. I want to trust you. Maybe this is the way some of you feel in this fear-based crisis we're in. I want to trust you, Lord. And Jesus says, come. This, by the way, is a command. It's the third command of this passage. Take courage was the first command. Do not be afraid was the second command. And now he says, come. And Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. In other words, what Jesus is saying right here is, Peter, trust me in the storm. I know it feels like I can't do this. He invites us, and we actually could say, he commands us to trust him in the storm. And this is what it means to walk on water. This is what it means to get out of the boat. The boat is a place of fear. That's where everybody else is freaking out. And some people say, well, Jim, they're not really all freaking out because 4 of these guys are fishermen. But you're right, 4 of them are fishermen, but 8 of them are not fishermen. There's a good chance that 8 of the 12 disciples had never been out on the boat. We sometimes think all the disciples were fishermen. All of them have been on the boat. No, 4 of them. Everybody else is a landlubber. And so they're flipping out being on the boat in the middle of the lake, in the middle of the night, in the middle of a storm. They're flipping out about this whole thing. So the boat is a place of fear. And Jesus says, step out of that place of fear and trust me. See, you can walk on water. You can walk in faith in the midst of a storm. You can do this. You can trust God even though the fear is all around you. You can trust God. He invites you to trust him. You can step out of that fear and keep your eyes on Jesus, and you can walk through this fear, friends. You're not bound. You're not captive. You can step out. I love this story. Jesus invites you to trust. He's saying right now, come. Don't live in that boat of fear. Step out with me. And don't be bound by that fear. So the passage goes on. But Peter did. But when he saw the wind, and one translation says, and the waves, because how do you see the wind? When he saw the wind and the waves, he was afraid. He had looked on Jesus, focused on Jesus, but now he's focused on the wind and the waves, and that brings the fear. So what do we want to do? We want to focus on Jesus. That's where our attention needs to be. The wind will rage around us. The waves will be buffeting. They will be tormenting us. We must focus on Jesus. That's how we make it to the storm, not just kind of putting our head down and just hoping things are better, but by looking to Jesus, focusing on him, even though we're in the storm. Jesus doesn't say, hey, the storm's all gone. In the storm, he says, come. In the storm, he says, it is I. Look at me. And it says immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. Peter, he's so much like us. We trust God in the storm. We trust God in the fear. And then something else happens. We hear a new news bleed, or a new person says something, or we hear something else, and we go right back into the fear. Isn't that the way fear is? It keeps coming at us. So once you have surrendered your heart to God, don't think that fear will never come. Fear keeps coming. We have to keep looking at Jesus. And this is a great story to remind us that if I look at the waves, if I look at the wind, if I look at the circumstances, if I listen to the fear-mongering, I will fall back into fear. I've got to keep looking at Jesus. Amen? That's where my focus needs to be. And verse 33 then wraps this thing up. It says, then those who were in the boat worshiped him as they looked to him. And Jesus got in the boat, and the wind stopped. The calm came. It's like the presence of Jesus brought peace. The presence of Jesus brought the calm. And when they realized that, it says they worshiped him and said, truly, you are the Son of God. This might be the most important thing happening in this passage. It's not just that Jesus rescued them. It's not that just that Jesus saw them and came to them in their fear. But Jesus was revealing something here to his disciples. And he wants to reveal something to every one of us in the midst of this crisis we're in. This coronavirus crisis for Christians is not about just getting through. What does God want to reveal to you in the crisis? And for these disciples, it was to recognize that this powerful rabbi, this amazing miracle worker, this incredible prophet of God is more than that. And they say, truly, you are the Son of God. You are more powerful than nature. You're like the Old Testament where it says that only God can still the wind and the waves. Who are you? You must be the Son of God. And they're right, but not all right. Because while it's true that Jesus is truly the Son of God, we know he's more than the Son of God, right? Back in verse 27, when Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, this phrase here, it is I. In the Greek, it's two words. It is I am. And it has to be in caps, and it has to be capitalized in big, bold language. It's like when Jesus says, ego eimi, I am. It is an unmistakable reference to God's name in the Old Testament. When God revealed to Moses, this is what you are to say to the Israelites, I am. That's my name. I have sent you, Moses. There's this whole thing going on in Exodus chapter 3 where God shows up to Moses and Moses goes, oh, okay, well, who are you? I'm not even sure I know who you are. And God says, I am. That's who I am. And Moses is thinking, that's a funny name, but that's not a funny name. It means I'm always here. I am who I am. I always have been. I always will be. I always am. I will exist in the future. I'm with you. I'm here. And this is what Jesus is saying when in Matthew 14:27, he says, it is I. I am. I'm the God, not just the Son of God. I am the God of the Old Testament. I am the God of your fathers. I am God all powerful. I am more powerful than whatever you face. This is what Jesus is saying with these simple words. Ego eimi. I am. And boy, do we need to hear that. It's not just that, I've heard people say we need to have faith over fear. I want to edit that. I don't want to focus on my faith. I want to focus on Jesus. I want to focus on the great I am, who is more powerful than whatever I face. Because remember, folks, it says in James chapter 1 that many people believe in God, and even the demons believe. But watch this. James says, anybody know what the next word is? They believe. I know there's a God out there, but it says, and they tremble and terror. There's this passage in the Old Testament that says, the voice of the Lord. So think of Jesus saying, I am. Think of God saying in the Old Testament, I am, Moses. The voice of the Lord shatters the darkness. The voice of the Lord strips off the barks from the trees. The voice of the Lord causes the earth to tremble. And I want you to understand that when Jesus speaks, the darkness trembles at the sound of his voice. That's how powerful this language of I am is. It's not just the voice of Jesus, it's the voice of God himself saying, I am here, I am present. And at my voice, the darkness trembles. You don't have to be afraid because I'm here. Isn't this amazing? All this is happening in this passage, so we don't have to be afraid of the darkness because it trembles at the presence, at the voice of Jesus. And he calms the storm that rages and the storm out there and the storm that rages within. This is a Jesus who silences fear with his very presence. This is the I am who has come to you in Jesus. This is the I am who's with you. Jesus. Amen. Jesus. Now we get a little understanding of who he is. He is the one who calls us to obey him in the darkness, to obey him in the storm. These crises that we go through, they're just tests to see if we will obey Jesus or if we will succumb to the fear. And I want to invite you to obey Jesus. Don't be afraid. I am. So now we're ready to finish the outline. When you feel the darkness of fear, do not be afraid. Focus on Jesus. Amen? Focus on Jesus. In fact, just close your eyes with me right now. Jesus, we want to focus our attention all on you right now. We want to put our mind, we want to use our will to focus in on you. Jesus, to hear you say, I'm here. The great I am, it is I who is here. And I am with you. And so Jesus, we just say your name. It's like breathing out, Jesus. In fact, we all say that with me, wherever you are, sitting in your living room. sitting in your car, sitting wherever you are, just say Jesus, say his name. Jesus, the one who silences fear. Jesus, the name that causes the darkness to tremble. Jesus, the name above all name that overcomes the world. Jesus, the one who's more powerful than whatever we face. Jesus. Say his name. Just breathe it out. Jesus. And friends, in the days to come, when fear rises, because it's going to come back, just say the name of Jesus. He's here. He's with you. He's come to you. Say his name. Jesus. Sing his name. Jesus. Jesus. He'll make the darkness tremble. Father, I pray for my friends and those who are listening that they will say the name of Jesus. They will hear the word of God. It will resonate. Jesus. Jesus. You make the darkness tremble. So we're going to sing this together. So stand to your feet and just going to sing the name of Jesus. We're going to sing the truth that we've just heard.